Welcome to Right on the Mark with your host, Mark Young. Today's podcast, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies, Jaws. Now, Jaws was made some 44 years ago, and it is by all means a classic. I think it came out in June of 75. I remember that very vividly, going to the theater, watching that. It must have played multiple times a day at the Coil, the cinema, or the State, and it went on what seemed like months and months and months. And I don't know how many times I've went and seen it, but I remember seeing it and couldn't believe it, simply because I thought it was just a great movie. There were so many scenes in this movie that were my favorite scenes, even to this day. I mean, I have a ton of DVDs, director cuts, VHSs, all kind. I even have the book, as a matter of fact. I think it's floating around here somewhere. But everything that had to do with Jaws, that's what I was about. Jaws was made, I think it was in Martha's Vineyard, but they called it a place, I guess it was a New England tourist town called Amity. So that came around, and it was really weird because the Amityville Horror was around the same years, I'd say within a few years of each other. So that was kind of weird, being from a town called Amity with a shark, and the Amityville Horror came out around the same time as well, as from what I could remember. But man, I tell you what, I saw Jaws so many times. People will tell you, especially in my family, the lovely Kim Logan, they'll tell you that I quote their sayings all the time. There's just so many things you could talk about in Jaws. There was Chief Brody, Hooper, Quint, even Larry Vaughn, the mayor in the movie, was awesome. There were so many key moments in that. And, I remember reading shortly after that Peter Benchley, who was the screenplay writer for that, was kind of he kind of regretted making Jaws because it kind of gave sharks a bad name. And after that, people just start going out and hunting sharks. So after he made the film, he kind of felt bad making it because it kind of gave great white sharks a bad name. But, they still have attacks and stuff like that out there. But I do remember reading that. But I remember seeing the movie for the very first time. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I remember coming back and telling my friends who didn't see it, and I swear it must have took me 45 minutes to tell the story of what it was about, because I think I went scene by scene. Generally you just give highlights of a movie, but man, when that movie came out, I'm like, I got to tell you everything, like from start to finish. I mean, I could tell you from when that girl went swimming all the way to the end of the scene at the end of the movie when the boat sank. But man, there's just so many good things, and I could remember going to school. I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade at the time. And I would just think about it because as a young kid, I was always fascinated by the beach. I just couldn't get enough of it. Back then we went to the beach maybe once a year, and that was lucky. I mean, we were lucky to go to the beach once a year. Maybe it was every other year or every third year or something like that. So when you saw water at the beach, it was always fascinating, especially being from Menneson. I mean, there was no beaches around here. You saw water, you saw river and stuff, but you never saw a beach. I can remember one of my good friends, Jeff from Maryland. I met him at the beach one time, and he's like, "Dude, what's wrong? You never saw water before?" I thought that was funny. I'm like, "No, this is a different kind of water. It's ocean water." I always was fascinated by how the waves come in and how big it is and how dark and creepy the water was. You never knew what was in it. But so that made for a perfect shark movie. I'm quite surprised that it took them so long to make a shark movie, but there were so many times that I could remember just daydreaming about that movie as well. Maybe I liked it a little bit too much. I can remember in 4th or 5th grade, I was in Miss Leone's class, and she used to teach science. And in Catholic school, they called on you whether your hand was raised or not. So if you raised your hand, sometimes you won't get called on. And if you didn't raise your hand, you did get called on. So it was always, a crapshoot whether you should raise your hand or not, whether you knew the answer or not. And I've been burned on that before. There's been times when I've been called on with my hand up and I didn't know the answer. So I would just pause for a couple minutes like, and and then they'd just move on to the next one. Like Amy Mandarino would know it, of course. And then there'd be somebody that would call on you when you didn't have your hand up. In this particular instance, in fourth grade in Miss Leone's class, she called on me and I didn't have my hand up. And to this day, I don't even know what the question was, but all I know was for a couple minutes, all I kept thinking about was the Jaws movie. So, there's dead silence in the classroom for a minute or two, waiting. People are waiting for my answer to the question. And to be honest, I don't even know if I heard what the question was. I was still daydreaming about being at the movies with Jaws. So that's how it started out with me. Was I just knew it kind of just kind of like I could daydream about it and just couldn't get over how good that movie was. And by today's standards, with all the digital effects and stuff like that, it might not be the best out there, but for hands down with a mechanical shark, you can't beat it for sure. I could remember, Steven Spielberg was, the director of the movie. And I don't know if he was a big name or not back then, but he certainly was. I mean, after the Jaws making of the movie, he came out and he was a genius, supposedly, you know what I mean? And Peter Benchley was, like I said, the cinema, I guess, I don't know if he was the cinematographer or whatever he did, but he created all the robotics, all the sharks, and all the screenplay and all the stunts and stuff like that. So his name was big. And I can remember seeing on the book Jaws by Peter Benchley. And the book ends a little different than the movie for you out there that haven't seen the movie. But there's probably very few in between that haven't seen that movie. But there are people who haven't. I could remember, Deb first asking her if she's ever seen Jaws, and she's like, "No, what is Jaws?" I'm like, "You've got to be kidding me!" Like, my whole family was there, the lovely Kim and Sean and Logan, and we were just stunned that she never saw Jaws. That was crazy. But yeah, that's something that my family does, and we quote those sayings all the time. Like, there's always something in your life that goes on that you could say is a Jaws phrase. For instance, you need a bigger boat. You could always say, you're going to need a bigger truck. You're going to need a bigger car, something like that. You're going to need a bigger refrigerator. So there's always quotes from the movie that actually translate into real life. So I always thought that was fun and interesting about doing stuff like that. So that's my remembering of 1975 Jaws. But through the years when VCRs came out and DVDs and stuff like that, you were able to watch the movie anytime you want. And, the movie came out around the 4th of July. And I want to say that every 4th of July, they actually have it on TV. So it's 4th of July when Jaws is on. And as a matter of fact, I think recently they start putting Jaws out on the big screen. So you could go to the movies now on the 4th of July. It might be the day before the 4th of July and the day after. Because I remember Logan and the lovely Kim going. I was out of town the 4th of July, but they actually went to the theater to go see Jaws again. And man, I was disappointed that I couldn't go because I have seen Jaws many times, but I haven't really seen it at the theater probably in the last 40 years, I'd say. So it's got to be good. They said it was good, but I wish I was there. There was, so many things that I could be watching at the movie theater. With Jaws coming out around the 4th of July, I'm going to try to make it this year. Hopefully it is out in the theaters. Usually is, but hopefully it is because I definitely want to go. And, some of the phrases that came out, I mean, these are big time phrases. I mean, people use these phrases in other movies. You know what I mean? Like, this is no boating accident. There's all these little hidden phrases in certain movies where you could hear that, but you have to pick it up. And they all reference that movie. So it wasn't just me and my family that was influenced by that. I'd say the whole country or the whole world was influenced by that movie. And a lot of it was ad-libbed. My understanding is Gonna Need a Bigger Boat was ad-libbed. Even Chief Brody, when he said that, he wasn't supposed to say it, but it was so good he went with it. You know what I mean? And there were so many other phrases. When there was a fire on a boat and, Quint's like, "Chief, put out the fire. Chief, put out the fire." And Chief's like, "You're certifiable, Quint. You're certifiable." He's like, yeah, I know. Just put the fire out. And then, Matt Hooper's out there going, "Oh, boys, Oh boys, he's come back for his daily feeding. So, yeah, there's so many phrases that you could use. And I remember doing that with my kids. You know, I got 2 boys, so I can remember saying, oh boys, it's time for dinner. Yeah, so I still use phrases from that. You know, and then there's so many other quotes, I guess you could say. I mean, come on, the USS Indianapolis, when Quint explains that. My understanding is Quint was a heavy drinker during the movie, so I know him and Hooper didn't get along throughout the whole movie. In fact, Quint was in trouble with the IRS, from what I understand, and on the days off that they didn't shoot, he would actually have to fly to Canada or fly to Mexico just so he wasn't on set to get paid, because if he made a certain amount of money, he owed too much in taxes, and he just couldn't do it. He just had to be flown out of the country so he wouldn't make enough money. But my understanding is he did drink a lot on set, and that didn't go well with the other castmates, especially Hooper. So I can remember when he told a story about the USS Indianapolis the first time, he was really hammered, and he didn't really make a lot of sense. So the next day, Spielberg just cut it all out and said, Quint, this isn't going to work. You can't come drunk anymore. He's like, no. He's like, give me one more chance. Give me one more chance. I'll do it the next day. So the next day's take, from what I understand, is he did it flawlessly. It was one take, and it was very dramatic, and it all happened in probably less than 5 minutes, and they were able to use that footage and edit it and put it back in, because the day before when he was drunk, it just didn't make sense. So he did definitely have some skills. I like a lot of scene of Quint. I was sorry to see him get killed in there, because Quint was the man. One of my favorite scenes in that is when he went to go buy piano wire. Now, Quint's voice is kind of, New England, Boston-y, Massachusetts, and it's kind of hard to understand what he says because of his accent. So he goes to the store, and you don't know what in the world he's doing, but he goes to the store, and he goes to a piano store, and he tries to get 12-gauge piano wire. I'll take 12-gauge piano wire. Here you go, Mr. Quint. What are you going to do with all that piano wire? And he was like, I'm going to go fishing. And then the lady was like, well, what does the sharks do with those piano wire? And he was like, they choke on it. So that's one of my favorite scenes is that one, definitely buying the piano wire to hook the shark, because that's about the only thing that's strong enough to hook the shark. There's other scenes in there with the barrels, like you can't go down with 3 barrels, not with 3 barrels. And of course I translate that into life. You know what I mean? You could say so many things with that. Like if somebody's, dishing out food, or, cutting cake, saying you can't have 1 piece. You can't have 1 piece, You got to have 2 pieces, 3 pieces. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of this that just translate into real life, which is always fun. I always try to look for those spots where you could interject one of these Jaws sayings. And, back in the day, I used to act out Jaws a lot. If I had a few beers and I was in a hotel with a family, I'd just throw my beer and go, Chief, put out the fire. Chief, put out the fire. Oh, that's fun, and people would just crack up. And both my sisters, Debbie and Dana, they just love it, and they could just act it out. And they sing along too. I mean, there's a song that my sister Debbie loves singing. Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. I drink about an hour ago, and it went through my head. Dun, 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 let me go. I land on the airboat. I'm off the let go. And then you start hearing Jaws busting in through the bottom of the hull of the boat. And then they start getting out and shooting it. They start shooting it. And he's like, Quint, you can't kill it. You can't kill it with a rifle. You can't shoot it, Quint. It's a shark. Come on. And then, Chief runs out there. They all run out, and the sun's starting to come up. So they must have been drinking all night and singing and getting loaded. And then they start fighting the shark, And this shark, I want to say it just circled them for days and days. And, it's funny. The mechanical shark, I remember they said it didn't come out. Wasn't shown in the film till like an hour and a half into it, or an hour and 20 minutes into the movie, which I thought was crazy. But because there were so many problems with the mechanical shark, that they couldn't show it early in the film. I mean, they showed a lot of people getting eaten, but you didn't see the shark. So, the music, the dun 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 dun, you heard a lot of that, but you didn't see the shark. So I think that made the movie great. Little did they know, not showing the shark so early, it just kept you in suspense halfway through the movie until you saw it. I want to say that the first time you actually see the shark is whenever their chief's doing a chum line. He's throwing some chum out in there, and he's like, "Why don't you come down here and shovel this shit?" And then all of a sudden, Jaws comes up. So I want to say that every time there was a swear word, as a kid, I want to say every time there was a swear word, you saw the shark for some reason. So I thought that was interesting. But Chief was the only one that saw the shark at first, and he just kind of eyes bugged out and kind of just leaned back. And that's when he says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." And of course, there was a lot of, my understanding is there was a lot of, pranks being pulled on set. Spielberg was like in the mechanical mouth of the shark, and, they had to shut down shooting for days because the shark wasn't working. And I remember seeing some of the backlot stories. If you watch the director's cut on DVD, you could hear a lot going, "The shark isn't working. The shark isn't working. Shark isn't working." So there was days where there were downtimes and they couldn't shoot. They only had to shoot scenes without the shark. So they had a lot of problems with that. I can remember that tiger shark early in the movie where they talked about, the tiger shark. A what? A tiger shark. A what? That shark was actually flown up from Florida. It was a 14-foot tiger shark. They couldn't find any sharks in the northern waters because if you remember in the movie, those sharks are really rare in those waters. So they had to fly a shark in a personal plane from Florida up to Massachusetts to hang it upside down, and it took a day, I guess, to go get the shark, bring it up, and then it stunk. They said it stunk like heck. So that's why whenever you see that real shark and they open up the mouth on it and it just bleeds from hanging it up there, my understanding is all the blood and guts just ran down towards the mouth of the shark. So that was a real tiger shark that you were looking at, and it did stink. So in a part of the movie, they said, just get this shark out of here and dump it in a drink. But then they later go and cut it open and do a half-ass autopsy, as the mayor Vaughn would say, and see that Kitner Boy spilled out. So that shark really did stink. So when they cut it open and you saw the license plate come out and you seen all the milky water come out of its mouth, and I remember them talking about it, saying they did actually have to pour milk in the water and in the shark's mouth to make it look really murky. I think one of the phrases he says was, "Oh, just as I thought, came up from southern waters." Oh yeah, Chief Brody says, "How do you know that?" And then he throws him a Louisiana license plate. So he's like, this shark ate a car. So that was a classic scene. I mean, there's so many of them. This podcast could be hours. You could just watch the movie and just be amazed at it. And the lovely Kim always accuses me of watching the movie and just saying the words instead of the actor saying it on TV. Like she said, you could actually put it on mute and I could just say the words because it's so annoying watching the movie with me. I just know almost every word that they're going to say. So which I think is kind of funny, but a lot of other people, so I'm not the only one too. Like, my sisters will do that. Debbie and Dana will do the same thing. And, she's always like, "Oh, Jaws is on. So I always think that's funny that people always know that, just know the word of Jaws just for the movie going. So that was a lot of fun to watch that and mute it and just say the scenes as you see them. It's funny, we were talking about the Kitner Boy, and I can remember them making the scene whenever Kitner's mother came and smacked Chief Brody, telling him, like, "You knew there was a shark in the water. You knew, and you still let people go swimming, and you knew." And she smacked him. My understanding is that she couldn't really just love tap him, that she actually had to slap him because she didn't really know how to do it. She wasn't that well trained. And it was funny because she looked like a grandmother to that Kitner Boy. which I kind of thought was funny. It looked like her grandmother, but here it was a Kitner Boy's mother, and that slapped Chief. So I thought that was kind of cool that they put that into the scene. It was funny. I can remember reading a few years back that the Kitner Boy, the actual Kitner Boy that played in the movie, must have lived in the Massachusetts area. So he actually went into a restaurant a few years later, and he saw on the menu up on the board in the kitchen, and it said the Kitner sandwich. It's like, the Kitner sandwich. They're like, yeah, we had that kid, Jaws was filmed here. And we had this kid that was killed in the movie, and his name was Kitner. So that's the Kitner sandwich. And the kid that stopped in there was like, I'm the one that played that boy. And nobody could believe it. But yeah, there is a Kitner sandwich, believe it or not. I think that was really funny. But, that's some of the stuff that you hear. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I've read it on the internet, or I've seen it in a book. I wasn't in the director's cut. But that's a lot of stuff that they can't put in a director's cut. Heck, you could go on and on forever with that if you want to analyze each scene. There was parts of the movie where there was a little bit boring. Not many parts, but there's a few boring parts, with, Chief early in the morning getting up and eating breakfast and, just getting ready to go out. And I'd say some of the funny parts were because of their accents, Like early in the movie, whenever little Michael cuts himself on the swings, you instantly think, oh, he's going swimming and the shark's going to get him because there's going to be blood in the water, But, Chief is like, there's a car in a yard. Don't step by the car in the yard. I always thought that was funny. Just the accents that they had. And, man, these actors were really good. I mean, I know Chief's gone, and he died a few years back, and Quint died a few years after the movie release, like the late 70s he died. But, man, he really brought a lot to the show. All three of them were great. I mean, there was a lot of key people in there, and just the key scenes. You wouldn't actually know how bad and how hard it was to shoot if you watched the movie. You thought it was made flawlessly. And I remember whenever I went to Universal Studios back in the 80s, me and the lovely Kim went back in 1984, and we went to Universal Studios in Hollywood. And I remember actually getting in a ride on a tram, and you could actually see the shark jump out of the water. So they show you kind of where they film it. They show you the beach where Chief is running on the beach waving his gun. Everybody out of the water! Everybody out of the water! Can you imagine seeing a cop waving a gun on a beach chasing a shark? That is just fantastic. That is just great. You just won't see that nowadays. But yeah, some of those scenes were just fantastic and out of this world. By today's standards, it's not acceptable to be waving your gun on a beach chasing a shark, but that just made it so that much funny. Oh man, I'll tell you, they could have, they could have extended the movie a lot longer. I understand that they cut out a lot of scenes in here, so a lot of the scenes that weren't in the movie, they put on a director's cut, and you could go see for the deleted scenes, and you could watch, and probably a half an hour after it. I want to say it's like the 40th edition Jaws special edition DVD where you could hear all that stuff. But yeah, so you could go to Universal Studios and actually see the shark. I took a picture with the shark, saw the shark, saw the beach. It's actually a lake with a huge backdrop of makes it look like an ocean, but it was actually like a little lake where they filmed it. And you saw the beach and the sand dunes, and you could see where they were running early in the movie when the girl was running down the beach, and she was holding on to that buoy. They actually had her strapped underneath the water, and they were tugging on her. So it wasn't an actual shark that was pulling her under. It was took two people that were pulling her down with these harnesses, and I think she actually broke some ribs because my understanding is when they yanked her down with that harness, they jerked her a little too hard to make it look like it was really a shark attack, and she had broken ribs or cracked ribs or fractured ribs or something like that. And then when she finally slipped off the buoy and went under the water, that was the last of her. And then the next day they showed her washed up on the shore. And my understanding from what I read is that was an actual arm that was in the sand whenever they looked at it. Spielberg tried to put a fake arm, but it just wasn't to his liking. So they actually buried an actor in the sand and had a real arm stick out of the sand. So the arm was sticking, an actual human arm was sticking out of the sand, and then they got crabs. But in order to move the crabs, they had to pour hot coffee on them. So this actor is buried up to their head. They had to pour coffee on the crabs to run all over her arm, which was actually a real arm, and it was pinching her like crazy. And that's how they got the actual footage scene. So that was some good stuff that they had to do. You know, nowadays a lot of that is all computerized, and it just doesn't look real. Not that I thought that Jaws was actually real, but there's just a point where real is better than animation or digital or digitized or whatever you want to call it they do now. So I kind of think that there's never going to be another Jaws to live up to the original one just because of the mechanicals that they had in that part. I mean, there was parts in the movie where you saw, we even saw the pier. The pier in the lake where they, the two, I guess, fishermen were fishing for the shark because of the reward. So you could actually see the pier as you go to Universal Studios. You can't go and walk on it, but you could see that, which I thought was really interesting. Definitely Universal Studios is definitely the place to go if you want to see where they filmed Jaws. And I know it was over 40, maybe 45 years ago, but I guarantee you they still have a lot of memorabilia there. Heck, speaking of memorabilia, I can remember, in the late 70s, there were shirts and tank tops and I want to say, toy sharks and stuff like that. So they really sold a lot of merchandise after Jaws as well. All the phrases basically were classics. Every phrase in the movie you could say and people know what you're talking about, especially the USS Indianapolis. I mean, come on, that doesn't get any better than that. One of my favorite stories in there is Herbie Robinson. I ran into Herbie Robinson the other day on day 2, Chief. He's a lot younger than Mr. Hooper over here. But, I ran out of Herbie Robinson, and I said, hey, he's a shortstop player from Cleveland. And I went to wake him up in the morning, he bobbed up like a cat top. He'd been bitten in half, below the waist. That's right, Chief. I'll never wear a life jacket, Chief. I'll never wear a life jacket. So that's a lot of stuff that you want to really listen to, and you might even have to replay it again just to hear it. It's that good. And I actually like that. It's one of my favorite parts. Is definitely the Indianapolis. Another great scene was the cage scene. Whenever they ran out of ideas, they ran out of ideas. They don't know what to do. So Hooper brought this cage, and he's like, "What are you gonna do with this cage?" He's like, "I'm going to go in the cage." And then Quint goes, "You're going to go in a cage. The cage go in the water. You're in the water. You're in the cage. Farewell, little lady of Spain. Farewell, little lady of Spain." He starts singing like he's saying, "You're never going to last." And then Chief's like, "Oh, that shark is gonna tear that thing to pieces. You're not gonna go put that in the water." He's like, "You got a better idea?" Hooper's like, "You got a better idea?" All of a sudden, they're building a cage and putting it in the water. And I can remember reading that those were real sharks around there, but that wasn't the actual shark that ran into the cage. It was a smaller shark. And one of the things you could, one of the best things I love to play while watching Jaws multiple times is seeing if you could find anything that's wrong with the scene or the movie. And there's multiple things wrong, but if you watch it the first time, you'll never pick it up. But after, watching it 100 times, you probably would know. But the shark that actually rams the cage is a smaller live shark that they did, and you could just tell by the mouth. It just wasn't the same as the real mechanical Jaws. And there's multiple places in the movie where you could actually see that they messed up and they just never went back to edit it. They probably just said release it. They were way over budget, and it just seemed like they needed to get it out. I mean, take in the beginning whenever all the fishermen were going out to go fish for this shark to kill it because there was a reward. And there was a guy, heavyset guy, getting into a boat. And he got into the boat like 3 times as he was talking whenever Hooper came in. So that's just one of the scenes that I want to say was probably in the first 15 minutes of it that you could tell was messed up. And I'm like, how did they not catch that? But I guess they don't have time to go back and watch these movies as much as the audience. They got to move on to the next movie. So there's so many things to go into making movies. And I understand a little bit of what they go through now just because Logan's kind of in the movie business. So I see firsthand behind the scenes of what happens. I mean, there's multiple angles you have to shoot. There's lighting, there's sound, there's actors waiting in the wings to say their lines right. So I see how just a 5-minute scene could take, hours. But that's one of my favorite things to do is just watch Jaws and watch some of the something that I haven't seen before. And one of my favorite parts is whenever they're looking to find somebody to kill the shark. Quint wants 5,000. And other people are saying no, 5,000 is too much. They were offering I think like $500 or something, but Quint was the only one, and he scratched his fingers on the chalkboard. And that's how he got everyone's attention. So that was another one of my favorite scenes is when, whenever Hooper and Quint got along and says that you're not going to pull this on a boat, are you? He's like, maybe I ought to go alone. I need 2 cases of brandy. Put it on a boat. You guys aren't going to fight on a boat, Chief says. Maybe I should go alone, Quint says, which I thought was kind of funny. What would Quint do there alone? But you'll definitely have to watch it. You'll definitely have to see it if you haven't watched it. I guess I could understand if you haven't watched it because there's movies that people believe that I've never seen. Like, for instance, Star Wars. I've never seen Star Wars, and people give me the same reaction whenever they say I've never seen Jaws. So I guess I could understand whenever people say that, wow, I can't believe you've never seen Star Wars. And I'll go, wow, I can't believe you've never seen Jaws. So that's always funny. I mean, they made multiple Jaws after that, but the first one will never be duplicated. Jaws 2, came shortly after, a few years later. It's Jaws 3D. My sister Debbie was in Florida on her honeymoon whenever they made Jaws 3D, and she always, that's her claim to fame. She always brings that up when we talk about Jaws. So she won't never let you forget that she was there while they were making Jaws 3. Jaws 4, The Revenge, this time it's personal. It's kind of like the worst one, and that was the last one. And I can remember Logan always saying, I'm going to make Jaws 5. So he would actually, write down a script, how he's going to make Jaws 5. And this ended up, I want to say he was like, 8, 9, or 10 years old. And he started writing up this whole book on how he's going to make Jaws 5. And I think that was the start of his movie making. Or thinking about being a movie maker, thinking about being a director, producer, actor, or editor, or sound, or whatever. So I think that's how he got started going in to this business. And now I kind of shined a light on a lot of movies, and I watch movies a little bit differently now because, Logan analyzes it clinically, and he tells you whether it's good or bad because he does all the behind-the-scenes stuff. So he knows, which I think is kind of cool. So hopefully in a couple of years when he gets out in the business and he gets a job, depending where it is, hopefully we'll be there to see it. I'd like to see a movie that he worked on and see his name in the credits. That is good stuff. But you definitely have to get out there and see Jaws if you haven't seen it. Around the 4th of July is when it's going to come back on TV. It'll be very popular, but definitely get out and go buy the director's cut of Jaws. It's always been one of my favorite movies, so I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I really enjoyed talking about it. I mean, there's so much material to go over, to talk about that, I get too excited where I can't explain everything the way I want to, so it just comes out. So go out and see it for yourself and relive Jaws again. I mean, it's never a bad time to watch Jaws. Isn't that the truth? But I'd love to hear about your first experience about watching Jaws or reading the book or what have you. If you ever have a Jaws shirt or something like that, I'd like to hear from you. Don't forget to leave a comment down below, tap the bell, subscribe, do all that. That about wraps it up for Right on the Mark with your host, Mark Young. See you next time, folks.